Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you had a good break. Let us know in the chat what you got up to. Did you go into a networking room? Did you try some mindful stretching, or did you check out one of the booths? So much to do. It's just too hard to choose. I actually had some food because it's 7:30 p.m. here in Madrid, so it's my dinner time. But I'm very excited now to be introducing two ladies who will be talking about mending and restorative moderation in online groups, okay? So Anika's recent book, How to Handle a Crowd, is a collection of interviews with moderators from across the internet. She wrote her master's thesis about online news comments and helped build and manage online communities for several media brands. Her current goal is to lead innovative, ethical, and collaborative work that challenges how we think about online conversations and the digital future. Felicia has been a librarian for 15 years and is currently a faculty librarian at Xavier University. She is also the founder and leader of Real Talk, WOC and Allies for Racial Justice and Anti-Oppression. Real Talk provides a safe space for women of color and also educates white women on how to become allies. Please give a big virtual welcome to Anika Gupta and Felicia Fulks. Welcome, ladies.
Hello, it's so nice to see you and so nice to be here.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to come off screen, so take it away and I'll come back when you need me.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who's here. It's exciting to see so many people already in the conversation. Excited to read your comments and hear your questions. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen, and then Felicia and I will introduce ourselves and get right to the topic, which we're both really excited to talk about. All right. Can everyone see? I hope this is all working fine. Felicia and I are going to talk about this idea of mending and restorative moderation, which is a topic that's close to both of our hearts. And to give you all a little bit of context, one of the things we talked about when we were really pulling this presentation together are certain questions that have come up for both of us. For me, as somebody who studies and thinks about online groups, and then for Felicia, as somebody who's created and now runs this really vibrant and interesting group called Real Talk. And so some of the questions that we've been seeing a lot of, particularly recently, in light of the many conversations we've all been having around like structural racism, how do you have conversations about that? How do you be thoughtful about these topics? Some of the questions that we've seen come up are things like, how do you respect the members of an online community while also addressing the fact that sometimes they do things that cause harm to other members? Is there a way forward that doesn't involve banning or canceling members? What are alternatives to that? And then finally, and this is where, you know, I'm really excited to have Felicia kind of share her enormous wisdom with us. She'll talk a bit about a process they use called mending, and who does it and how. So those are our key ideas. Felicia, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
So my name is Felicia Fulks. Currently, I work at Xavier University of Louisiana. We are waiting for our hurricane to hit, so it's a really exciting day here. I founded Real Talk almost 4 years ago, right after the 2016 election. And one of the reasons I did that is because I wanted to provide a safe space for women of color to have conversations that we're not comfortable having around a lot of white people. But I also wanted to have a space where we could train white women to actually become allies. And we have been doing formal training for white women for about 3 years now. And it has been very interesting. It's definitely grown my group in ways I hadn't thought about. And we're going to continue doing it until we don't have to do it anymore. I'm really excited about it. I've learned a lot. I'm hoping the people in the group have learned a lot. And Anika's in my group now. So I'm excited. I'm really excited to talk to you today about that.
Awesome. And I'm excited to talk to you. So, I mean, me, Anika Gupta, The way I met Felicia actually is really interesting. So I interviewed her for my book, and that's how we got to know each other. And I was going through comments online, and I just started reading some of her blog posts and learned about her group and the efforts they were making. And we got to chatting, and I was like, "You're extraordinary, and this is really interesting." And so that's how we met. And then the book came out. I saw some of you commented that you have started reading it, which is wonderful. I'm so excited for that, especially in this community of people who love communities. So to talk a little bit more about kind of the message and certain ideas that are going to come up, I've started with a few quotations that I, have pulled out of our various spaces. One is a quote from the book. What does it mean to create an online community that advocates in favor of racial justice, or at least greater understanding? And that's one of the questions that came up as I was talking to Felicia and to other people who were trying to create communities in this space. Leisha, if you would like to kind of read your quotation.
Yeah, this is one that I say in my group a lot. Anti-racism is a grassroots effort. Work on changing the minds of people in your lives.
Which is awesome. And then I have another one here from the amazing thinker and feminist Loretta Ross, who wrote, "We can build restorative justice processes to hold the stories of the accusers and the accused and work together to ascertain harm and achieve justice." And I think that this is a goal that's incredibly admirable, but also really challenging in practice. So what does it look like? So the origin story of how Felicia and I met is I was actually interviewing the moderators of another group, which many of you may have heard of and some of you may be members of, and that is Pantsuit Nation. And that's a group, it's an enormous group. It had millions of members, still does, and it formed around the time of the last presidential election to support Hillary Clinton's candidacy. And one of the things that the group grew really quickly. It wasn't beyond the initial, anticipation of the founders, and they quickly realized that they needed to think about how to moderate conversations, particularly among diverse groups. And so I was talking to the person who runs their moderation team and who is their director of engagement now, and the areas where they said they'd had a lot of challenges is in addressing questions around race. Even though it was a really large or a group that identified as liberal, conversations that would happen around this topic and would break down. And the way that Grace, who's their director, what she said to me is, we had women of color at that time. She's referring to the time when she first took on this role, and rightfully so. And they faced several unique challenges. Among them, how do you deal with a group that's so enormous, millions of people? How do you deal with the fact that you're talking about race in a group that is primarily not women of color? And how do you go about, creating with a moderation team that isn't necessarily very large? I think at that time they may have had around a dozen moderators, but how do you really create a coherent tone? And I think these are really tough questions with no easy answer. But I started talking to Grace a little bit about how they train moderators for their enormous group, and how they tried to deal with some of these challenges. And so several of the things that she talked about are things that, other moderators whom I spoke to in the course of interviews also talked about. And I know, Leisha and I will talk about some of these themes too. But several specific things that she would do.
You're cutting out, Anika.
So when they
recruited
members, one of the things she told me is it's really important in conversations like this that you not only...
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I'm not sure, but I know
Oh,
you've
no. Are other people also having that problem?
Mm-hmm. I can hear you now. I can hear you now. Though.
Yikes. Okay. Why don't we do this? If I go out again for any chunk of time, just flag me and I can repeat what I've said.
Yes, that's fine.
Is that okay? Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry about that, y'all. I'm not sure why that would be. We were fine right before this. So there were a couple of things that in this really large group that came up again and again for how to handle training moderators. And this is one of the topics that's going to come up in, when we talk about mending too, is how do you empower and train moderators? How do you choose moderators? And specifically, how do you give them the role? How do you enable them to have these tough conversations? So a couple of the tools that she talked to me about included de-escalating tension. Like, how do you train moderators? So they would actually go through a formal training. She would walk them through tools and sample phrases for how you de-escalate tension around difficult conversations. They would include things like, you know, maybe this was your experience, but it wasn't everybody's experience, etc. And this is a huge part of moderation in general, but it's especially a huge part of moderating these kinds of really tough conversations. And the second thing she talked about is, how do you bring education into this conversation? So how do you provide resources around issues related to marginalization? So one of the things that she would do is link out to extensive resources. And the goal there is, if you're interested, before you even come into the conversation as a community member and start saying things, ideally you'll be able to have read some of these materials, you'll engage with these topics, and you'll be coming in from a place of good faith. And then finally, she talked a lot about how do you create space for moderator self-care and coping. And that's something that, you know, comes up a lot, but especially when you're dealing with issues of identity, right? Like, these are difficult conversations. If your moderators identify as being from marginalized groups, it's going to be harder. So how do you create space for them to step back? I was really interested in all, and these are all great, like, for any of you who are thinking about, like, how do we train our moderators around difficult conversations, these are great ways to begin and great things to think about. What are sample scripts for de-escalating tension? What are resources? What are the specific processes for self-care and coping? But also, as I was going through, you know, the group, one of the things I came across were comments from Alicia, and that's how I found Rail Talk. And I was really interested in Rail Talk because they took these ideas and they took them even further, and wanted to really ask, instead of trying to just make change in this huge group, how do we create a group that really is by and for women of color for these spaces? And how is that different? And I was really interested in that approach. And so we're going to actually spend the rest of the conversation really talking about Real Talk and understanding how they were kind of both drawing on, but also kind of pushing back against and challenging the ways that things were happening in this other large group. So with all of that said, did that come through all right? Could everyone kind of generally hear? Awesome. Okay. So moving into our favorite part of the conversation, how we come now to Real Talk. We talked about a good place to begin, and we thought the rules would be a great place. So this is, you know, directly coming from the rules. Felicia, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how you went about framing these rules, and what are some of the key things that you know are established in your rules at Real Talk?
I started this group really off the cuff. I didn't even have a structure in place. So we had all of the problems Pantsuit Nation, by the way, still has. They are doing training, but it's a very problematic, toxic group still, but I'll just leave that at that. But so when I started Real Talk, you know, I didn't have anything in place to even prevent the harm that was eventually going to start immediately. So what happened is that a lot of people come in, and we were at like 7,000 people at one point. So it was really much larger than we are now. We're like 1,300 now. And we had some very generic rules in place that we copied from some other group, and they didn't really say much. We ended up just formulating a lot of our rules based on the experiences in the group. So we knew if we were going to have a diverse group where it's going to be all women, but the white women are going to come from a power dynamic that women of color are going to really take issue with, and that happened very quickly, then we're going to have rules in place to mitigate that. So we have rules that say things like, women of color, you come into this space and it needs to be safe for you. So these are things we're going to do to make sure that it is safe for you. So if a white woman comes in the group and they are racist and they're really spewing hatred, and we've had some really terrible situations in the group, and not for a while, but when we first started, we did. So we basically said that if you are exhibiting behaviors that are just racist and toxic, and you're not open to amending or a way to, you know, basically apologize for what you did, learn from it, and move forward, then we remove you from the group. But we give you a chance to fix it first if we move from the group. So all of our rules are in place to make sure that it is as safe a space as we can have. So we do have separate rooms in our group to be able to address harm, and we do that regularly. And we've been doing that in a very separate way for about 3 years. So, you know, I don't think any other group out there does it as well as we do it. And I think they don't do it with the understanding that we're going to give you a chance to do better, to make amends, and to move forward, because our goal is to do that. We don't really want to say, well, you know, we've tried with you, we want to remove from the group. We're really going to try to educate you, because we need those allies. So every chance we get to teach you, we're going to do that, but we're not going to throw ourselves on a sword so that you can learn something. No one's going to do that, but we're going to make sure that you get a chance to understand that harm you caused and then fix it and move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that that's one of the things about the group that I found really interesting. And I see that throughout, like, this is just a clip of the rules, but I think throughout the rules, I see both this foregrounding of, here are things we're going to do to ensure that this place is safe for women of color, but also rules saying, here is how we will respect you as an ally. And I think both of those things live side by side. And I think that's really valuable. And so I think that brings us to this idea, and we thought it would be good to just have a bit of a conversation around this topic of, how do you go about creating that space for people to kind of address harms? And so we kind of covered a little bit the first question, which is how Real Talk got started. But I'd love to, you call this process, you have a name for this process, and you call it mending. And I'd love if you could talk us through, like, what is mending? How did you create it?
So
and what does a mending interaction
in the beginning,
look and like?
And what happened is that we had a lot of clashes between white women in the group who came in with this idea that they were going to behave like they did in Pantsuit Nation. Because a lot of us came from I came from Pantsuit Nation. A lot of us came from that group into my group. So the reason that we ended up doing the mending is because it was a daily thing that was going on, where the white women were doing, you know, saying things that were just really harmful and racist and white supremacist. I mean, you know, and they had gotten away with that, so they really didn't really know any better. So I have a really strong group of white allies who are moderators in my group. And I have one moderator who's been in my group almost since the beginning. Her name is Rebecca, and Rebecca is a pastor, and she is also hands down one of the most amazing trainers you will ever find. And so she actually put together the mending, and now it's a mending room, it's a mending space. And the reason that it's its own space is because as soon as we see a white woman harming in what we call the regular room, the living room we call it, we're going to take them out of that space. We're going to say, okay, we're going to call you in because of XYZ. Please meet me in the mending room. And it's always going to be other white women doing the mending. We don't want to put that labor on women of color. So they are told, do not comment anymore. We're going to work through this in a different space. And typically what happens is they need to, the person who's doing the mending is going to break down, this is what happened, this is the harm, these are the reasons that you're in this other space right now. And so they have to be able to work through understanding why what they did was harmful, how they can address it, how they can apologize. And I don't mean just say sorry. I mean apologize as in, I am sorry for doing XYZ because I know the consequences of that to you were these things. So it has to be a very deep understanding of that harm. And the people who do the mendings have gotten really good at knowing when somebody's just phoning it in, because they'll say, nope, that's not a mending. That's not a mending. And mending is not punitive. You're criticized for what you did, but it's always going to be done, as one of my moderators says, with grace. Because no one's going to learn if you're screaming and yelling and cursing at them. We don't want to do that in my group. Deaf people get frustrated because we've had some really, really harmful white women come through this space. They're not there anymore. But the menders are very calm for the most part. They're very understanding. They've all been in that space. And I think the people who are doing the mending are also well aware that they will never get past needing a mending. No one's going to ever be perfect. So that's the actual mending room, and we've had it for 3 years, and it works really well. And I think the people who have been in my group for a long time are really good at explaining why it is that space is separate. and why it's such an amazing space, and why it is that so many people go into it and go out of it after they've gone through their mending, and they feel actually a lot better about going forward to try to be an ally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds like mending is a challenging process, but it's also a very hopeful one.
The people doing the mending are going into that with the hope that the person that they're mending is going to change, and they will work with them for, I mean, this is not a one-day thing. Sometimes it is weeks of mending. Sometimes it can be a really long process, and that's extremely labor intensive, you know, and it's tiring, but they do it, and some of them have been doing it for years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I think there are, so I mean, I have another question here, but I think there will probably be a lot of questions kind of following up on that too. That kind of leads to, you know, we're talking about mending. We're also all aware you can ban somebody, you can remove them from the group. Though there are many different ways that you, as, you know, the convener of a space, can deal with people who are kind of violating those rules. I guess the question that comes out of that is, how do you identify whether someone is a good candidate for mending versus, say, just outright removal? And I guess, like, kind of inherent in that is this question.
You know what it is.
I asked you this when I... No, I think that's so true. There's just some dreadful people. Like, I feel like this question is also a chance to just acknowledge there are some dreadful people. But how do you identify that? And then also, I asked you this earlier because I was curious, and others might be too. What are, maybe if you can think of a few examples of the types of things that get people called into mending?
Okay, so candidates for mending, anyone can go into mending. Everyone's going to be called in if they do something that requires them to go to mending. Having said that, if someone's in there and they're, you know, hurling racial slurs, we've had some TERFs in our group, you know, and we'll actually try to work with them, but, you know, you have a TERF in the group, they're not going to change and they're going to be removed. But I will say it is rare that we automatically remove anybody unless, you know, if they've gone to mending and they've just basically fought it and they've said, I don't understand why I'm here, which does happen. I don't know why I'm in this mending. I didn't do anything wrong. I have a right to speak my mind or whatever. They're usually going to be out of their group at that point because they're too disruptive to the process to be able to say they can come back at some point, but they're going to be removed for that moment. What was the other part of your question? Oh, yeah.
What are the types of things that you've had to thank somebody for?
We actually have had, I think a lot of white people in general have a hard time following directions when the directions are given by a non-white person. I run the group. All of my admin are women of color. We're all pretty vocal in the group, and we're very visible in the group. And, you know, there's this weird dynamic of when another white woman says it, they have a better chance of listening to it versus when I say it. So if I post something and I say something like, this post is just for women of color, and I have some kind of commentary, ultimately what's going to happen is a bunch of white women are going to post anyway because they didn't read what I said. They get called into mending for that. And that's a fairly minor thing. If you are on a post and you are white-splaining someone, and white-splaining means that you're basically, you know, talking to women of color in a way that is acting like they're a child, that they're not as bright as you, that they're not as accomplished as you, you know, that, you know, you're talking in a way that is only coming from a white perspective, and because it's all you know, obviously, and not understanding that when you cross the line and you say something like, that thing that you just described that you said was racism, I don't think that's what it was. That goes into mending. Yeah, that's definitely a mendable offense right there. We actually implemented a rule last year, which has worked really well. The rule used to be that you got called into mending for things that you did in the group. But I said, you know what? No, because all of us are Facebook friends outside of the group. And when I see things outside of the group that I think are problematic, I want that person called in. So now we call them in from other places, and people are fine with that. So if you're on a page doing something really awful, you know, where, you know, maybe it's a post by, you know, a non-white person, they're talking about police brutality, that's one of the hot button topics right now. And you're on the page saying, you know, I just don't think that was brutality because we didn't see the entire video that goes into Mending. You know, it's things like that. Yeah, it's things like that where a lot of it's not knowing where your lane is, because as soon as you cross into my lane, you need to go to Mending. And it's with the understanding that it takes a while for the behavior to change. So I don't expect it to be the first or second or third time. It's probably going to be a few times before they get it, and that's completely fine. But it definitely is this issue of not knowing that my lane is my lane and your lane is your lane, and I'm in this lane because these are my experiences and my history and my culture, and I'm always going to be the expert on those. And if no one asks you your opinion, that also goes to Mending. So if you gave it without people asking, that goes to Mending too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think these are really interesting principles because they're kind of holding all of us to a very high standard for how we talk to and relate to each other in general. You know, I mean, these aren't just true of online groups. It's really how, you know, I mean, obviously that's the whole, you know, premise of both the book and our lives here. But, but you know, these are principles you can carry into conversation, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it also what's interesting is when I noticed that occasionally I saw people.
That's happened that's happened fairly often. It's funny because you get white women, the women who've been in the group since the beginnings are aware when they overstep, and they'll say, okay, let me just go to Mending right now, because, and they'll say, I did this outside of the group. This is a thing that I did to a friend of mine, to a non-white friend of mine. So I'm going to call myself in and tell the story in Mending, and I need to work through it. You know, and that's pretty amazing. Like that's really amazing that you're aware enough without anyone telling you that you've caused harm. Yeah, and it happens a lot. People call themselves in, and they'll usually post in the main room and say, I need an ally to help me. I did this thing. This is what happened. Here's the link to Mending. Can someone help me? Yeah, that happens a lot. It's pretty amazing.
It's really interesting that Mending is, you know, it's a very therapeutic space in a way where like both menders and mentees have a lot of agency or can have a lot of agency.
Right. I think they do have a lot of agency. One of the women who has been a mender has been she's a mentor too. So she's one of the people who trains in the classes that we do also. But she's been doing Mending for almost the entire time we've had the group. And she always says that when she finishes a Mending that she learns a lot from the Mending also, because she's aware that she can backslide really quickly into whiteness, and the things that she thinks she knows better, she'll start doing them again. So she sees Mending as a way to push herself forward consistently instead of kind of backsliding, because, you know, the idea that you've learned enough to be a pretty good ally and that you're one of the better white people, like she's like, that is a dangerous thing to start believing about yourself as a white person, that you are now not as capable of creating harm as you were because now you have this training or you've been in this group or whatever. And she's like, none of that is true. I can be just as harmful as anybody else. So it's very insightful.
Totally. One of the things I like about a lot of your writing too is this idea that we're all kind of continually in process. You know, we're not like trying to be good people. That's not the goal. It's to keep kind of working. And I guess the question that kind of follows on that is one of the things you and I also talked about is, you know, we've talked a little bit about like Mending being a space for white women. How do you deal with the harms that people of color do to each other?
We actually have a room for that too. It's called the back porch. So all of our rooms have like names that are like related to houses. So the back porch is the space for women of color. And we have absolutely had really big clashes in the group. If you think about it, you know, we're probably representative as women of color, so many different backgrounds and cultures and what have you. And there is definitely going to be clashes. We know that there is, for example, anti-Blackness in the Black community. You know, so we are not immune from being hateful to each other based on our own skin colors. And that is in a lot of other cultures. It's not specific to the Black community, but it's happened in the group multiple times. And typically, either I or one of the women of color moderators, women of color admin are going to work with that person. And we understand also when that happens, a lot of it comes from a very painful past that we have. So it's either, if it's colorism, it's probably because of things that happened in your past. If it's talking about, criminality or single motherhood or things like that, and you're making these comments that are so incredibly hateful to your own people or to another group because you assume certain things that you've seen in the media or that you've seen or heard, amongst other people, that all of that has to be addressed, because we cannot hold ourselves as women of color to a different standard if we're creating harm too. We have to work on ourselves too. And I know, as a Black woman, it is definitely something that, I've had to kind of reach inside myself and figure out how I'm going to do better with that. But we definitely address it in the group. To me, it's an extremely painful conversation almost every time, because you're listening to this person tell you these beliefs that are just so harmful and so bad, but you're also trying to figure out, like, what in your history or what experience did you have to make you come to such, a painful conclusion about this group, and what reflection is it having on you? So yeah, it's a really hard conversation, and we've done several, and they just sometimes just make you want to cry because they're just so awful. But we definitely have the space, and we do address it immediately, just like we address the issues with the allies. Yeah. And we grow from them. Yeah. They're always going to be there because we're always going to all have these different histories and these different, really painful experiences that we bring into the group.
Absolutely. I really value that too. I mean, obviously, as someone of South Asian heritage, definitely I've seen like colorism and anti-Blackness there too. And it's hard to have those conversations and to like continue to work on yourself in that space. So I think it's great that there's so many different journeys that people are on. And I guess that kind of brings me to my final question. We've talked a lot about who comes into mending, who does it, how you get there. How do you set expectations within the community so that people appreciate mending and they don't see it as punitive?
Right. I really depend a lot on the group who does the mendings and the group who do the trainings, the 2-week trainings that we do for white women in Real Talk. Before they come into the group, every white woman is required to do these trainings. The moderators who are running those and the mentors who are doing that have been in their group for years. And so they explain very clearly that, okay, you've gone through this training and now you're going to be invited into the group. There is a space that we call the mending room, and this is what it's for. And basically they say there are rules in place for mending. We are not humiliating you. We are not there to make you feel terrible about yourself. I mean, you might anyway, because maybe you're embarrassed, but we're not there to heap more humiliation, embarrassment on you. It's not what mending is. They say things like, mending is a place for you to grow as a person and to grow as an ally. And one thing that one of my moderators, Bethany, who was absolutely amazing, she says, I look at a mending as a process where I am walking with that other white woman. So I'm not walking ahead of them because I'm not any better than them. I'm walking the process, and I'm doing it with grace every time. The mending room is interesting because it is its own really tight-knit kind of community where people will go in there and have talks about things that, really aren't appropriate for our main area. If they're saying, okay, I went to this, there's all these marches that are going on. Someone said, I went to a march. It was all white. There was not a person of color in sight. Why would that be? And it came down to, it was whoever was organizing it. They just organized it in a way that only white people showed up. But that wouldn't be a conversation for the living room, be a conversation for the mending room. It's not necessarily a mendable thing, but they're asking a question that would be way too centering on themselves for the main space. So the mending room has definitely kind of evolved and grown. And it's just become, and we've actually opened up virtual mending rooms in other groups who've asked us, and we've trained them, because it's been, you know, it is just such a fantastic way to kind of keep the main area of your group from imploding. So for us, it's worked really great, and people like it. I think they really respect the process, and they understand that it's really for your benefit. It's not to make you feel terrible.
Great. Well, this is amazing. I actually think we don't have too much time, so I did want to kind of come back to the discussion and.
Do we have questions? Is that what we're going to do? Oh, I think you froze.
There are people who might be interested in.
Yeah. Oh, Gina's back.
Hi.
I'm back. Okay.
First of all, can you just give a big round of applause to both of you for sharing so much great knowledge in the space of like 35 minutes, which, you know, there was so much you covered. It's hard to like keep up, but it was really good. So thank you so much. We do have a lot of questions, so I want to go straight to them to ask you them. So first of all, Mike says, can these techniques work for people that are non-binary and part of the LGBTQA+ community? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, it would be the same process. I mean, and it'd be the same process, I think. It's just you're going to change the rules a little bit, but it's going to be exactly the same process. A mending room, a space that you think is safe, being able to call in people who are problematic, who are causing harm. I think it works exactly the same way. And we have people in my group who are non-binary, by the way.
All right. So. I hope I'm saying this name right. Reet, I think that's right. Do you think that technology could ever be employed to empower mending at scale? For example, could someone do the mending process by themselves with automated prompts if they demonstrated progress in some way / gave an apology? Or is it absolutely critical to have a human ally teaching / guiding process?
Do you want to take that one? Because I know what you're going to say, so go ahead and take that one.
I mean, I feel like we're both making the same face. I do appreciate where this question might be coming from, but I think the reality is that, I mean, mending to me feels like a really human process. In general, a lot of this kind of moderation is very human. And I think in that sense, it is very hard to scale it. It is one-to-one. So I don't necessarily know if I see it being as beneficial without that human there to respond to and talk through what's happening with you. I mean, maybe one day in the future, if technology is like that much better and develops a conscience and all that, but like that's
and then
the
also,
science fiction
you know, one thing that I will
yet.
mention in my group,
that's my thought,
is those relationships. It's not just that mending room time. Usually that person ends up being kind of an accountability person. If they really form a connection, it's an accountability partner. So conversations are happening outside of mending that I am not aware of, which is great. They're holding each other accountable. They're forming these little groups to make sure that they have someone they can always talk to when something comes up. So it's not just a mending space. It's the relationships that happen based on what's happened in mending. So that you can't really automate at all.
Okay, next question is from Sydney. Felicia, I love the concept of mending. May you share how you came to white women doing the working in the mending space? How have you justified this, particularly to women of color naysayers?
The women of color love the fact that they don't have to do the labor, because in real life, we do a lot of labor already and we're tired. The white women actually understand that because they are oftentimes almost all the time, white men and white women, you're the perpetrators of racism. So why is it that I have to expend my labor to actually do that kind of work? And, you know, so that's why we have white women doing it. And also one thing I've noticed, and I'm sure that Anika, you have noticed this too, is when if I as a non-white person call in a white person, they probably won't take me as seriously as if a white person calls them in. So that's happened to me. And I do a lot of call-ins, and it's hit or miss. If I do it out in real talk, yeah, I run the group. Yeah, I can do a call-in. And out in my life, it is just super hit or miss that a white person actually listens to me when I say much of anything. So I already know if I let women of color do mendings in the group, it's just going to be a lot of painful, harmful, awful situations, and I'm supposed to protect them in the group. So that's, to me, first and foremost. Unless somebody's willing to pay them money, literally pay them money to do that, I would never have women of color do those mendings. Too harmful, too much harm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, like you said, there is something very powerful too about somebody being able to say, I've been in your position.
We're running out of time, there's just two questions I want to ask. Stephanie says, taking this conversation and applying it to an organization or company perspective, how would you recommend that employees can hold their white women leadership accountable for participating in the mending process and apologizing for past harm to Black employees and people of color?
You want to take that one, Anika?
I love this question. It's a tough question, right? I'm curious what you think also, because I know you've trained large organizations, Felicia, but I think one of the challenges is, in any situation, in this particular question too, the question is, how do employees hold leadership accountable? And so that's like operating across a power dynamic where, a lot of times employees are not the ones who have more power, and that's really hard. And it's very hard for me to see that work well in an environment where leadership, themselves are not very bought into holding their top level employees accountable, and where there aren't processes for doing so. Like, right now we're in the midst of many companies announcing initiatives to try and improve their efforts in this area. And Leisha and I have had a back and forth about how effective we think some of those are. But honestly, I think it's very hard for that to come solely from employees and for it to be effective. But on the other hand, if leadership buys into it, I think that it can be a really powerful tool for, employees to have conversations. I think there are a lot of great tools out there to think about, how do you put out statistics around this? How do you create space for feedback that is safe to your employees? Those are the places I would start with resources.
A little bit, and
I don't know if you want to add to that, Felicia.
If your organization is not really being serious about diversity and inclusion at every level, these talks will never work anyway. Because there's no way that your entry-level people of color are ever going to trust an all-white upper-level management. No one, they're going to be like, oh, why are we doing diversity and inclusion if you can't even diversify and include us in those upper levels? So I think that the huge problem is you have to diversify at every level. And then you have to be honest with yourself about the problems in your organization. You have to bring in or hire someone permanently who can address that in a really pointed way, where there's not going to be retaliation, there's not going to be, all these hurt feelings that when people get hurt, that it just kind of draws back and nothing gets done. So most organizations absolutely are not going to do that, though. They're just not. I think diversity and inclusion for the most part is kind of a joke. All right,
final question then is from Raina. She's asking, is the group open? Can anyone join it? A lot of people.
Women, women, non-binary people, women, no men. I'm sorry, guys, no men. One day we might have another group for men, but for now it's just going to be women. And yeah, absolutely. So if you just Google our main page or go to Facebook and search our main page, which is Real Talk Women of Color, WOC, Women of Color and Allies for Racial Justice and Anti-Oppression, and message the main page. That's our public page. Our group is actually secret. If you message that page and say you want to join, one of my moderators or one of my allies will actually get back to you and tell you the process. And you go through the 2-week training. It's $35. It is really labor intensive. It's extremely good. And then once you pass that, you go into the group, and then you get a chance to see all these amazing things. And you will meet people in there who you'll probably be, I have friends in there I've had for 4 years who I consider some of my best friends. So you meet people who are just absolutely amazing in there. So yeah, absolutely, just message the page and you can join. That's on Facebook. Yeah.
All right. Well, we've actually run out of time, so there are more questions. So if people want to get in touch with you and ask more questions, how can they do that very quickly?
I think our emails are on the slide. Do we want to put in?
They're in the slide. Yeah, let me quickly just skip ahead to that slide and show it to everybody. So I will.
Sure.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'll do that. I'll put that in the session chat if we're all comfortable with that.
I'm gonna put the Real Talk link in there. Let me grab it real quick. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so I'm popping in the session chat, contact info.
Perfect. Well, give a big round of applause once again to Anika and Felicia.
Okay.
Thank you so much, ladies, for sharing with us today. And yeah, hopefully if people will reach out to you and ask you some more questions. All right. Thank you, ladies. Well, I'm heading over now to go and introduce Sarah Wilson, but there's so much else going on. Yep. Don't forget to use the hashtag CMX Summit 2020 in all of your social posts. I will see you in a little bit. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was great. See y'all.